Good morning. Good to be with you here today. We are continuing in our series called Family Tension. If you've missed a couple, you know what, you can actually still go back to it. If you go onto our website, you can listen to the audio, or you could actually, even thanks to Phil, if you watch it on YouTube, there's a link right there on our webpage. So if you missed some, want to go back and check it out, you can do that. Also, if you wouldn't mind, if you could like us on Facebook, that'd be a huge help to us. You don't have to like me, but if you like the church on Facebook, that would be awesome. It just helps get expose our church out there a little bit more. Last couple of weeks, and you can do that right from the webpage also. The last couple of weeks, like I said, we're talking about family tension, and today we are talking about everyone's favorite topic, conflict, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, grown. When I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking about what do we all have in common. Here, just two things that I thought of that we all have in common on this topic. First off, we all have conflict, right? Every family, no matter how good they look on the outside, has conflict. The people sitting next to you, no matter how well they put on the front, and the reality is all families have conflict. Right? Sometimes it feels like we're the only ones, like it's our family. We're inventing new ways of dysfunction. Everyone else has it together, right? But we're charting new territory. Here's the reality. Every family has conflict. The second thing we share is a truth, is that when you win an argument in your family, you don't actually win anything, right? You don't get a trophy, you don't get a plaque, right? In other areas of life, if you win an argument, it could be a good thing. Like if you're at work and you win an argument, that maybe you get credit for something, or you win a bid. If you win an argument on the baseball field or the softball field, you can win the game, right? I know guys like to, you ever notice this? Guys like to argue about the stupidest things, right? You can win that argument. I once won an hour argument on who could win in a fight, Batman or Spider-Man, right? And if you want to hear about it, we can argue later, and I will win because it's that easy. But and when I won that argument, I got a lot of high fives. But here's the reality. When it comes to family conflict, even if you win, you don't actually win. Right? Have you ever noticed that? Conflict in family is just a whole lot more complicated than that. When there's conflict in family, it's more complex because it involves our heart. It always involves the past and not just the topic of what their conflict is about. And there's always more at stake, right? If you lose an argument about who's better, Spider-Man or Batman, nothing happens, right? The world goes on. But the reality is, conflict in family, there is a whole lot more at stake than in all the rest of areas of our life. And the reason it gets hard is because we all have conflict, but there's all kinds of ways to process or respond to the conflict. In every family, there's a peacemaker. The peacemaker is someone who just doesn't want to argue, even when they're in the conflict. They just want everyone to be fine, right? Are you fine? I'm fine. Therefore, everyone's fine. You might have a sulker in your family, right? And no matter what the conflict is about, they're just always down. Even when the conflict's over, they're still down. There's always a stuffer, right? That takes the argument and just kind of stuffs it down, doesn't want to talk about it because, you know what? If you never feel anything, then you must be okay. There's a litigator. There's litigators all over the place. You guys, I know there's some litigators here, right? You guys are really good at arguing, right? You win. If we were to ask you honestly, are you ever wrong? You would probably say, I'm never wrong because I never lose an argument, right? And in every argument, and your family knows this, right? They know that if they get in an argument with you, you're gonna win. You're going to bust out pie charts. You're going to show graphs, right? You're going to show the history. And at the end of it, the reality is, you know what? You win the argument. And there's a lot of people avoiding arguing with you because you're going to win. But remember, even if you win, you don't win, right? You don't win anything. There's, of course, a way to respond that I call it the screamer. That when the conflict busts out, it's easy to start screaming, and there's a good chance that in your family of origin, growing up, it was just filled with screamers, right? And everyone screamed, and when the conflict broke out, everyone screamed, got everything off their chest, and at the end of it, I was like, wow, that feels a whole lot better, right? Here's what happens, though, is that you probably married someone who's not a screamer, right? And your kids probably aren't screamers. And the first time you had a conflict and started screaming, man, afterwards you felt good because you felt like finally we're talking, right? But your spouse or your kids, they have the deer in the headlights, right? They're like, they want to lay hands on you and cast out the demon, right? That's what's going on. And because even when we win, we don't win. There's all kinds of responses to conflict. But today we're going to look at the source of conflict. Now, in James is the brother of Jesus, and he is going to take a very interesting thought about conflict. He's going to narrow it down to us, and he's going to suggest to us that in all conflicts there's a single source, right? And I know this is going to feel different. And by the way, today's going to, if you've been here often, this is going to feel a little different because we're going to look basic at 2.5 verses the whole day, right? 2.5 verses. The reason I say that is because some of you are reading through the whole Bible in a year or the New Testament in a year. And we talked about that sometimes when you're reading, you hit a bump, right? Where you're reading in the story or in a letter and something just stands out to you, and that's like the Holy Spirit nudging you. These 2.5 verses that we're going to look at today, I can't read through them. I know what they say. Every time I see them coming, I know what they say. But every time it's a bump, right? If we read through these verses and don't look at ourselves, I think we're totally missing what the Holy Spirit wants to do. So today, 2.5 verses, I want to flush it out and see how we could apply it in the context of family. We're looking in the book of James, and James starts off with a single question. He's going to ask the question, what starts fights and quarrels among you? Right? That's a simple question. What starts fights and quarrels among you? If I was brave, and I'm not, I'm quite the coward, but if I were brave, I would say, turn to the person you came with today and ask the question, what starts fights and quarrels amongst us, right? And the reason I'm not going to do that is because fights and quarrels would break out amongst us, right? It would be totally chaos. Because what happens is, our gut instinct, when we answer that question, what we do is we fight and quarrel because you do this and you say that, right? We have fights and quarrel because he's insensitive. We have fights and quarrels because she spends too much. We have fights and quarrels because those kids do not listen to me, right? We have fights and quarrels because he withdraws as soon as I talk about something. We have fights and quarrels because she yells as soon as we talk about something. We have fights and quarrels because he criticizes. We have fights and quarrels because she broke her promise. He did not live up to his vow. We're always doing this, right? When we talk about fights and quarrels, our gut instinct is to say, you're the problem, right? I would be happy. Matter of fact, if we were being super honest, we'd probably say, if everyone in the family would just agree with me and do what I say, there'd be no fights and quarrels, right? Which might be true, but you wouldn't have a family, you'd have like a Nazi regime or something like that, right? The truth is, and here's a truth that you've probably encountered, but we haven't applied yet. It's a simple truth that if we will never be happy as long as you blame other people for your unhappiness, right? As long as you are pointing and saying, I can't be happy until you do this or you do that, the reality is you will never, ever be happy. Joy will be an impossibility, right? When we blame others, really, honestly, when we blame others, what we're doing is we're taking our joy and we're giving it to them. And what we're saying is, you are in complete control of my joy. And the only way I will ever have joy ever again is if you do this or you do that, right? If you behave the way I want you to behave, or if you do this thing for me. And the reality is we become hostages, joy hostages to the people that we are blaming, right? And no one does this on purpose. No one wakes up and says, I'm going to give control over the joy in my life to another person, right? I'm pretty sure no one's ever done that. right? But as long as we blame other people for our unhappiness, that is exactly what we are doing. And let me be even a little more forceful today and say this, that until we get the concept that James is going to put forward to us today, the reality is we don't have any other choice than to give our joy out and be hostage to it, right? Until we understand the principle that he's going to talk about, and like I said, it's 2.5 verses, but it's not easy, right? It's 2.5 verses, and you'll understand what he's talking about, but buying into it, no, let me say it this way, but owning it is going to be really hard, right? Owning it and applying it to our family context is going to be super hard. And I know when I read this to you, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be say, what about this? And I'm okay with it because these aren't even my ideas, right? If they were my ideas, I'd be scared. These aren't even my ideas. This is James, the brother of Jesus, right? And if you've ever been in a family that high stress, like you wanted to live up to your older brother or your older sister, right? James was that younger half-brother of Jesus, right? He knows something a little bit about tension. But he's going to put forth a relational idea that honestly, outside the Bible, no one will ever talk about because it's just that crazy, right? So let's look at this. In James chapter 4, starting at verse 1, he says, "What causes the quarrels and fights among you?" Now that's a nice general question, and honestly, we would probably read that and say, there's probably so many answers to that there's like a different answer for each person you would ask. Like if we all answered that question, we would come up with so many different answers. But here's the deal. James is going to say something totally different. He's going to say that no matter who you talk to, there's one common source. He says this, "Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you?" Right? Don't they come, you fight and you quarrel, it's not because of something outside of you, it's because of something inside of you. You have a desire and it's not being met, right? Now I know there's all kinds of objections as soon as I read that, because we could read that and say, well, it's not something I want, it's something I deserve. It's not something I want, it's something they promised. Understand, we're going to come to that in a second, but what James is suggesting, and he's saying, it's not because of something outside of us that we have fights and quarrels. It's not because of them. We do this. It's because of you. It's because of you. It's because of you. I'll be happy when you do this, right? I will finally have joy in my life if you do this. James is saying this. The fights and the quarrels, that's the source, right? And I know that's hard to hear. It's hard to apply. But let's look at this for a second. And he goes on. He says this. He says, don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? And he says this, is you want what you don't have. You want something, and you don't have it, right? Every quarrel that, if we looked at it and analyzed every quarrel that we have, every fight that we have, there is something that we want, and we don't have it. Now, sometimes they're noble wants, sometimes they're not noble wants, but there's something that we want from the other person, and we don't have it. Sometimes it's, I want you to live up to your promise, and I don't have it. Sometimes it's, I want to feel proud of you, and I don't have it. Sometimes it's, I want to feel respected. Sometimes I want to feel loved, and I don't have it. And therefore, fights break out. But he goes on. He says, so you scheme and you kill to get it. You don't have what you want. Fights break out, and in order to get it, you scheme and you kill to get it. Now understand, he's talking to a church here. He's not talking to people on death row or anything like that. This is called a hyperbole. So he's using an extreme example to make a really important point. But what he's saying is this, is that when we want something so badly, that sometimes we're willing to hurt those who mean the most to us, right? Sometimes when we want something so badly, maybe we think we deserve it or we have it coming to us, but when we want it so badly, sometimes we're willing to hurt the people that matter the most to us, right? Now, we've all seen this, right? We've all seen the parent that kills a relationship with their children because they didn't get what they want, right? Some Some of us here, when we were 18 or 19, left home because we wanted something from our parents and we didn't get it, so we killed that relationship. We see them on the major holidays, but that's about it. And honestly, if we got both parties together and in between the crying and the fighting, what we would see that the person wanted something from the other person and they didn't get it. So they killed the relationship, right? We've all seen the man killed the self-image of the woman he made a vow to because there was something that he wasn't getting from her, right? We kill for it. We've all seen the woman nag or criticize or belittle the man she made a vow to because she didn't get something she wanted from him. We kill. We've all seen parents shame their kids so deeply that they're afraid to be around mom or dad, right? Because they didn't get something from them. We kill, right? I can go on. And do you know what I'm talking about, right? When we want something so badly, even the people closest to us, we can kill. Our words matter. We can kill with our words. We can kill with our actions. We can kill with not doing something, right? We can kill with forgetting to say something out loud to them. The reality is, when we want something so badly, honestly, we know we do this, that we can kill in order to get it, right? And this is what James is saying. And honestly, some of us might be in the process right now of doing this, and we don't even know it, right? Right now, we could be in the process of killing the relationships that matter most to us, and we don't even know it because we're too busy doing this, right? You're the problem. We would have any conflict if you did this, if you said that. You know, some of us right now are in the process of doing it, and we justify it, right? We find reasons. We say things like, I just want them to reach their full potential, right? We say things like, I just want what is best for him or her. We spiritualize it and say, I just want them to be a man of God or a woman of God, right? But the reality is, it's way more about us than it is about them. So we kill. Now, if that's all he said, that'd be pretty heavy, right? But he goes on. Yeah, I know. Do you know why we hurt the people that are closest to us? Do you ever wonder that? It's actually a really simple answer. Because they're close to you, right? Do you ever wonder why our deepest conflicts are the ones we made the deepest promises to? Our most painful conflicts are the ones that we took the risk with the risk to bring into the world. Do you ever wonder why our biggest conflicts are with them? Because they're close to you, right? If you never want me to hurt you or let you down or break a promise, stay away, right? That's the only way I can promise you. If you want me never to let you down, you have to stay away from me, right? And the reality is we put pressures on other people that they can never, ever live up to. He goes on in James, he says, you want what you don't have, so you kill and scheme to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Now that sounds heavy, right? And he's not talking about families here, but put this in the context of the family. That sounds heavy, but we've seen it, right? Remember when we started this series, we talked about real versus ideal. And in the Bible, there's a lot of ideals that seem, man, I don't know if I could live up to that, because when we look at our real, what's real in our relationships, it's nowhere close to the ideal that he's talking about. And we said that what Jesus does, he always points people to the ideal, but never condemns those who don't live up to it, right? So he always points to the ideal because there's something good in it. And if we water that down, we miss out on something. But at the same time, he always gives grace, right? The same person who brought the ideals to us is the same person that died on the cross for us, right? The same person that holds out ideals that seem really hard to get to sometimes is the same person that rose from the dead, right? He died and he didn't stay dead. He came back again, right? And if Jesus can conquer the grave, couldn't he conquer the conflict in our relationships? Amen. I mean, honestly, right? I know sometimes the conflict that we're in seems big, but there's no way it's bigger than the grave, right? It seems impossible, but it's not more impossible than rising from the dead, right? The good news is you're not following a Savior. I'm not saying follow someone who doesn't know anything about this, right? Or doesn't have any power, right? The invitation is to follow Jesus, who gives forgiveness, who gives the free gift of eternal life, but he also gives leadership in this lifetime, right? There is power for the impossible, what we call the impossible, in our relationships. Jesus sees it as an opportunity to show the power of the resurrection, right? Amen. So that's why we talk about this, right? It's not because it's hopeless. It's just hopeless if we leave it up to ourselves, right? No one said to do it by yourself, right? Matter of fact, Jesus came so you don't have to do it by yourself, right? The reason we can talk about this was that Jesus was dead, and now he's alive again. Now, if I were to stop there, I would suggest an application, right? You're not supposed to do this in sermons, right? But I'm going to put the application smack in the middle of this sucker. And I'm going to suggest this. When we're in conflict, in family conflict, and we feel the temperature rising. Is my microphone going in? Because this is money right here, right? So we need the microphone here. The application is this, is when we feel the temperature rising. What if we said this, and this should be in your bulletin. Do you know what the part of the problem is right now? I'm not getting what I want, right? And you got to do the hand signs too. Do you know what I think our biggest problem is right now? I'm not getting what I want. And what if the other person said, well, do you know what I think the biggest problem is, right? I'm not getting what I want, right? I'm not suggesting this removes conflict. Right? There's still things that need to be dealt with. But as soon as we go from this to this, the temperature of the conflict is going to go down, right? Because if I put the responsibility of my joy always in the other person, they're never going to be able to live up to that. They won't. Don't do that. We make these vows to the important people in our life, and then we put a responsibility on them that they can never live up to, right? Jesus died on the cross to meet that responsibility for us, right? The person in our house can't do it. When we go from this to this, the temperature of the conflict will go down, right? It has to. Now, I could tell you why most of us are not going to do this, right? Maybe you're here today and you're not a Christ follower, and to a degree, we are happy that you're here. To a degree, this place has been built so that you can come and check out Jesus. So we're happy that you're here. If you're a Christ follower, though, here's going to be the dilemma for you. Because you're going to see this, and because it's in the Bible that I should agree with it, right? It's God sent Jesus. His brother James wrote this down. God's trying to communicate to us. We know in this context that we're supposed to say amen and agree with it. The problem is, when we leave here today, that doesn't mean we're going to do anything about it, right? We could say to this, I agree with it, but when we leave here today, the question is, what am I going to do about it? Now, I could tell you why most of us aren't going to do anything about it, right? Why we might agree with the concept, but not put it into action. About 14 years ago, when I started ministry, so here's a statement that sounds hilarious to me because it's so understatement. So you might not understand this. When I started ministry, I was crazy naive, right? See, that's an understatement to me, but you don't know what I'm talking about. But there were so many things that I was so naive about. One of them was in relationship to helping conflict in family, right? I had this idea that all marriage problems can be boiled down to three things. You want to hear them? I thought it could be boiled down to three things. Someone said something stupid, someone did something stupid, or someone touched someone they shouldn't have touched, which was really stupid, right? So those are the three things that I pretty much boiled everything down to, right? So So I'd be trying to help a family go through this, and I'd be kind of listening to what they were saying, but mostly I was like looking for one of those things. And as soon as I heard it, I'd say, oh, hold on, stop. I got this. No, stop talking, seriously. I got this. You are stupid, right? You said something stupid. I know. I see some of you writing that down. Don't write that down. That was naive. Another thing that I did that was crazy naive was I had this tool that I thought was foolproof, right? And it comes from verses like this. I actually was thinking about the verse where Jesus says before you can take a speck out of someone else's eye, you got to remove that big old log in your eye, right? So I had this tool that I thought was foolproof, and I'm going to show it to you here in a second, but I'm telling you up front, it never worked. Like never, right? Here's what I do. I'd be with a family or a couple in tension. Put that circle up there. I draw a circle, probably not blue, but I draw a circle like this, and I would say this circle represents everything that comes from your conflict, right? This represents all the conflict in the entire house, right? And I would give each of them a pencil or a pen, and I would say, draw a pie slice on this pie that would represent your contribution to the conflict. In other words, what's your junk in this, right? Well, what's your part? And I would think, next slide there, it might look like something like this, and they're saying most of it's the other person, but this is my part of the conflict. And sometimes I would even suggest a sliver, just a sliver, just anything, right? Just a sliver. This is my part. It's basically the other person's fault, but I added a little bit to the conflict when I did this. It never worked because I'd hand the pencils out and no one would draw a slice. Not even a tiny slice. One time I was so frustrated, I said, if you each draw 1%, I will take responsibility for the other 98%, right? I'll give you a letter to give to your friends and family to say, you know what, we're messed up, but it's mostly the pastor's fault. If you just own 1%, right? And they wouldn't do it, right? And you know why? It's the same reason we're probably not going to do anything about what we're reading in James today. Here's I call it the reality check. We instinctively know if that we own a slice, we have a responsibility to do something about it. We understand as soon as we draw a slice, even if it's tiny, right? And as soon as we draw a slice, we have to go from this to this, right? Because I have some junk to work on, right? The reality is, until we do this, our junk is kind of compiling, right? We have junk from elementary school that's undealt with, and then we hit junior high and there's more junk, right? Then we hit high school and college and spring break and there's all kind of junk from that, right? And then we walk down the aisle and say, I got some junk and you got some junk, let's just kind of put all the junk together, right? And then we add some kids and they bring their own junk, right? They're inventing their own junk. And the reality is we're kind of compiling all this junk, and until we own our slice, right? Not change the other person, not control the other person, because even that will not make you happy or give you joy. I promise you. I know some of you still think that if you can finally control the other person, you'll be happy, right? If you can get them to do what you want or behave the way you want, you'll get it and you won't be happy, right? You'll get the control, but you might even think the conflict is gone. It's not, right? Until we own our slice, right? The reality is the temperature of the conflict will still be there. And understand, and remember, even in a win, right, we don't win anything when it comes to the context of family. And here's why. And you know why this is so hard? Because as soon as we own a slice and we say, this is my part, this is what I did to add to this conflict, we lose part of our argument, right? In the conflict, we actually lose our leverage in that conflict. And we want to win, right? We want to win that conflict. But even if you win, you don't win, We're holding on to our argument and our leverage because we think it's our right. James is suggesting let go of the leverage, right? Because if everyone in the house lets go of their leverage and we each own our slice, we could actually get something done, right? If we own our slice and we do something about it, the reality is we're making progress. And I'm telling you, what happens is once you own your slice, you give yourself a sliver, the reality is you're going to start to see that maybe your sliver is a little bigger, right, than you thought. And what you thought was a small deal, maybe is actually a bigger deal, right? Maybe you said something in passing, but it stuck to their heart, right? Maybe you yelled something out of frustration, but they're still, controlled by those words. Maybe you forgot to do something, right? You thought, oh, it's not a big deal, I just forgot. But it's a big deal to them. When we own our slice, it brings down the temperature, and we can do something about it. But James goes on. Back in James, it says, you are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and you wage war to take it away, and yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it, right? So we're so busy with our objections to this that we forget to even ask God about it. Now, I know the objections. Here's a couple of the objections that are going to come up. I understand this is hard. You're not going to hear this idea anywhere else except in the Scripture, right? This is radical. Here's the objections that we'll have. But he or she promised me, right? I want you to keep your promise. I want you to fulfill your marriage vow. I want you to do what you said you were going to do. I want you to follow through with what you started. And I'm not getting what I want, right? It might be true that it's based on a promise, but it still comes down to the fact that I'm not getting what I want, right? Second objection is this. It's not fair, right? And I got to tell you, I think we pulled the fair card way too quickly, right? Because if we wanted a fair world, Jesus would not have died on the cross for us, right? We pulled that fairness card way too soon. The reality is the fair world ended at the Garden of Eden. We're not living in a fair world. And honestly, we usually pull the fair card when we're at the bad end of fairness, right? If you go to the mall and there's no parking spaces available, and you're driving around and you're getting frustrated, and suddenly, magically, one pops out in front of you, and you pull in right before another car pulls in, not one of us would start hitting the steering wheel and yelling, this is not fair, right? Why should I get the spot and not that person behind me? We would probably see it as a sign from God that we should go shopping, right? I mean, it's just, right? But the reality is we pull the fairness card when we're at the bad end of the fairness, right? Another objection would be this, but they're not owning their part, right? That's another one of our fear when we draw on the pie chart, right? A slice on the pie. What if I draw my slice and then they don't draw a slice, right? Here's a reality in all of our conflicts is the one who deals with their slice first, you know who it is? It's always the person who sees himself as the most mature in that relationship, right? Every time. A lot of times what happens is we think to ourselves, I work on my slice, they work on their slice, right? Someone has to go first. It's always the person who sees themselves as most mature. Here's the thing. In your conflicts, in your current conflicts, do you really want to be the least mature one in that conflict, right? There's this invitation that we're getting from James not to take the easier route, but to do something differently because the results might be different. He says you don't have because you don't ask God, right? What he's saying is before we accuse, before we send that mean text with the little angry red-faced guy, before we call them a name, before we talk to our friends about how distant or unemotional he is, before we begin to sulk and make her ask 10 to 20 times what we're really feeling, before he says any of that, He's saying, did it even remotely occur to you to ask God about it? To say, God, I want my husband to make more money and I'm not getting what I want. God, I want my wife to respect me and I'm not getting what I want. God, I want my kids to do their chores and I'm not getting what I want, right? We don't ask that. And you know why we don't do it? Because we're so angry, we don't even want to talk to God, right? In our prayers, and if we do talk to Him, it's like this. You know what? God, can you make my wife be respectful? Right? God, can you finally fix my husband? Right? Can you do something about my wild kids or that mother-in-law that's driving me up the wall? Can you just do... My daughter is dating that crazy 16-year-old. I know you made him, but you probably had an off day on that day. Can you just do something? Right? And even in our prayers, we're getting it wrong, right? This is the point. It's even in our prayers, we can be doing this, right? He wants to change our prayers, right? God, I'm not getting what I want. Can you help me? Can you change my mind? Can you meet me? Because a lot of times in our prayers, what we're trying to do is get something from a person that they are completely incapable of providing for us. Right? Matter of fact, I would put it like this. Sometimes, even in our prayers, we're trying to get from another person what only God Himself could provide for us. Amen. And when we honestly go to God first in our prayers, He could show us that, you know what? This person isn't even in our life to provide us that thing. And you could squeeze them all you want. You could apply the pressure or the manipulation. They can't give it to us. Right? So we go to God first. But He's not even done yet, right? I need a nap. And He's not even done yet. In verse 7, He says, as an application, so humble yourself before God, right? In the conflict, what would be different about the conflict if in our home, if we just humbled ourselves before God? Because when we humble ourselves before God, what we're saying is, God, I'm not even the most important person in this house right now, right? And if we even just put ourselves as on the same importance level as the other people, the reality